The attorney's office smelled like old coffee and paper. My husband Marcus sat across the conference table from my mother-in-law and her lawyer, a yellow legal pad in front of him. A pen he hadn't touched yet. He wasn't nervous. That was the thing about Marcus. He never looked nervous. He looked like a man who had already decided how something was going to end. "Before we begin," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table, "I thought everyone should have a copy of this." My mother-in-law Patricia opened it. Her face didn't change right away. It took about 3 seconds, I counted, before the color started leaving her cheeks. I sat next to Marcus and kept my hands flat on my knees. I didn't look at her. I looked at the window. Outside, it was a gray November morning in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of day that doesn't apologize for itself. My name is Claire. I'm 32. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. I spend my days helping children build the small skills most people take for granted: how to hold a pencil, how to button a shirt, how to exist in a body that doesn't always cooperate. I'm good at patience. I'm good at noticing what's wrong before anyone else names it. I am, apparently, also very good at ignoring problems in my own life until they cost me everything. This is the story of how my mother-in-law spent 4 years slowly emptying the account I thought was going to buy my daughter a future, and how my husband found out 8 days before Christmas. And what he did next? Marcus and I met at a friend's backyard wedding in 2017. He was the best man. I was a guest who showed up late and sat in the wrong row. He came over and told me quietly, with no judgment, that I was sitting in the row reserved for the groom's grandmother. I apologized, moved, and spent the rest of the ceremony noticing how often he checked that the grandmother was comfortable. That was enough for me. We got married 3 years later. Small ceremony. Back porch of a house we rented for the weekend in Western Virginia. 40 guests. His mom in the front row wearing a hat that was slightly too large for the occasion. Patricia had opinions about everything. The flowers, the couture, the music, the fact that we didn't do a formal receiving line. She delivered these opinions gently, always with a smile, always with the soft landing of, "I just want it to be perfect for you." In the beginning, I took that at face value. I thought she was enthusiastic. I thought she loved her son and wanted to be included. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand the difference between wanting to be included and wanting to be in charge. Patricia lived 40 minutes from us, in the house Marcus grew up in a suburb east of Columbus, where she had spent 35 years organizing church fundraisers and neighborhood association meetings. Since Marcus's father died 6 years ago, she had become the kind of widow who filled the absence with activity. She called Marcus twice a day. She stopped by without notice. She had strong feelings about our grocery brands, our lawn care schedule, and the fact that we hadn't yet given her a grandchild. When our daughter Nora was born 2 years after the wedding, I thought it might soften something. Instead, it sharpened it. Patricia was at the hospital before I had finished the first hour of labor. She held Nora 20 minutes after she arrived in the world and cried in a way that felt real and large. The kind of crying you can't perform. I softened toward her in that moment. She was a grandmother. She was grieving a husband. She loved this baby. What I didn't know was that she had already started. By that point, deciding what that love entitled her to, Marcus's grandmother, his father's mother, had set up an education trust before she died the year before Nora was born. It was structured specifically for Marcus's children. The intention was college. But the trust was written broadly enough to include early childhood programs, private school tuition, specialty therapies, or any qualifying educational expense up to a defined amount. Marcus and I knew about it in the abstract. His grandmother had mentioned it once at a holiday dinner, and Marcus's father had confirmed it before he passed. When she died, the trust transferred. The amount was $240,000. The account was in Marcus's name, with me as secondary. And it had been quietly growing since Nora was born. The administrative management of the trust, meaning the paperwork, the annual statements, the small logistical details had been handled informally by Patricia since Marcus's father died. Marcus had let that happen without thinking too much about it, because she'd handled his father's estate. She knew the accountant. And Marcus trusted her the way sons trust mothers. Completely. Without receipts. I didn't know this arrangement existed in the way that it did until 8 days before Christmas last year. When our accountant called and asked us to come in, we thought it was routine. We'd been talking about setting up a college savings supplement, a $529 to layer on top of the trust. The accountant, a quiet man named Gerald who wore the same kind of sweater every time we saw him, slid a statement across his desk without saying anything first. I looked at the balance. I read the number 3 times. That can't be right, I said. Gerald's expression was the expression of a man who had delivered bad news before and had stopped trying to cushion it. It's right, he said. The trust had been drawn down to $41,000. $240,000 had become $41,000 in 4 years. Marcus picked up the statement and read it in a way I recognized the way he read things when he was building a case. Word by word. Column by column. He didn't speak for almost a minute. Where did it go? He asked. And his voice had that quality. It sometimes got very quiet. Very level. The kind of quiet that is actually the opposite of calm. Gerald laid out what he'd found. The withdrawals had been made incrementally. Never in amounts large enough to trigger the reporting thresholds that would have flagged them automatically. They were processed through a management account that Patricia had been the signatory on since Marcus's father set it up. On paper, each one was coded as an administrative disbursement or an educational consulting fee. Educational consulting fee. For a 3-year-old, my hands went cold on the drive home. Marcus drove without the radio, which was how I knew the thing spinning in his mind was something he was treating like a problem to be solved rather than an emotion to be felt. I knew better than to push him. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the highway and thought about the playroom we'd painted yellow for Nora. About the conversation Patricia and I had had 2 months ago when she mentioned she'd finally paid off the renovation on her kitchen, her new kitchen. The one with the custom cabinetry and the quartz countertops and the range hood that the contractor told her was imported. I thought about the trip she'd taken to Portugal in October, the cruise she'd taken with her book club in the spring, the way she'd mentioned both in passing, lightly, like someone who had found a reliable funding source and wasn't worried about it running out. I opened my mouth and then closed it. Marcus glanced at me. Don't, he said quietly. I wasn't, I know what you're thinking. He said, don't make it about that yet. Let me look at the documents first. Marcus is a project manager for an infrastructure firm. What he does for a living is take complicated, expensive, multi-year systems and figure out exactly where they're broken and exactly what it will take to fix them. He doesn't speculate. He maps. He traces. He finds the load-bearing point and applies pressure precisely there and nowhere else. He spent the next 4 days going through every document he could legally access. Bank statements, the trust instrument, the management account, correspondence between his mother and the accountant, a paper trail of transfers going back to when Nora was 14 months old. On the 5th day, he found the texts. Patricia had texted his aunt, her sister-in-law, in a message thread Marcus was able to access because it had been accidentally forwarded to him during a family group chat reorganization 2 years ago, and he'd simply never deleted the archive. He hadn't looked at it until now. He brought his laptop to the kitchen table on a Thursday night after Nora was asleep, set it in front of me, and said, "Read this." The messages were from 18 months ago. Patricia, To her sister-in-law, Carol, I've been using the education fund for some personal expenses. It's not ideal, but I'm the one managing it, and Marcus doesn't check. It'll be fine, as long as Claire doesn't start asking questions. She's always been the nosy type. I read it twice. The second time slower. The nosy type. I had never once asked about the trust. I had never questioned a single administrative decision Patricia had made. I had smiled at her kitchen renovation. I had admired her Portugal photos. I had handed her my daughter at holidays and watched her beam and said nothing about the way she sometimes dismissed my suggestions about Nora's care. Nothing about the way she spoke over me at family dinners. Nothing about the small, steady ways she had spent 4 years making me feel like a guest in my own family. I had not been nosy. I had been quiet. And she had read my quiet as permission. She knew it was for Nora. I said. Marcus nodded once. She took it anyway. Yes, he said. I looked at the table. How much did the kitchen cost? $68,000. He said. I checked the contractor invoice she forwarded to my aunt. I felt the number settle in me, the way cold settles in a room when someone leaves a window open. $68,000. The Portugal trip. The cruise. The renovation. The account visits that nobody was watching because Marcus trusted his mother, and I had learned very early in this family that questioning Patricia was something you did at a cost I couldn't always afford to pay. What do we do? I asked. Marcus looked at me steadily. We fix it, he said. Properly. With documentation. We engaged a trust attorney. We did not call Patricia. We did not send an emotional text. We did not let Marcus's brother Ryan, who worshipped their mother and would have immediately run to warn her. I know anything was happening. Marcus moved through the next 10 days with the precision of someone diffusing something dangerous. He gathered every statement, every transfer record, every communication. He documented the pattern, the amounts, the timing, the coded descriptions that were never accurate. He let the attorney review it all and come to her own conclusions before he said a single word about what he believed. The attorney's conclusions were not subtle. The withdrawals constituted a breach of fiduciary duty, potentially criminal misappropriation of funds, designated for a minor. The educational consulting fee language was not just misleading, it was fabricated. There were no consulting services. There was no educational contractor. There was a mother who had decided that her son's trust, her grandchild's future, was a resource she was entitled to access because no one was watching closely enough. That was when Marcus called and scheduled the meeting at the attorney's office. He didn't warn Patricia what the meeting was about. He told her there were some trust administration questions that needed to be addressed before year-end work owed. Patricia arrived 15 minutes early. She was wearing her good coat, and she had brought her own lawyer, which told us she wasn't completely surprised, which told us she had been half waiting for this. She opened the folder Marcus slid across the table. She looked at the transfer records, at the bank statements, at the attorney's summary, which did not use soft language. She looked up at me, and I think she expected to find what she'd always found when she looked at me: deference, accommodation, the face of a woman who had been trained since she joined this family to make peace before making demands. She found something else. I looked back at her, and I didn't blink, and I didn't fill the silence with an apology. And I think that was the moment she understood that something had changed permanently. This is a misunderstanding, she said. Marcus's voice was level. It isn't. I managed this account for years. There were costs. There were no educational consulting services provided to our daughter. Marcus said, there's no documentation of any service. There's no contract. There's no provider. There are transfers to your personal checking account? Marcus. Her voice went soft and maternal. All the register she used when she wanted him to remember that she was his mother and that memory should cost him something. I gave everything to this family. After your father died. Everything I did, I know what you did after Dad died, Marcus said. I also know what you did after Nora was born. They're both in the folder. Patricia looked at her lawyer. Her lawyer was quiet in a way that suggested he'd already told her how this was likely to go. I had not planned to speak. I had decided in the car on the way over that I would let Marcus and the attorneys handle it. That I didn't need to be the one to make the speech. That this wasn't about me getting to say the thing I'd been swallowing for 4 years. But she looked at me again. The way she'd been looking at me for 4 years, like I was adjacent. Like I was the woman Marcus had chosen, and she was tolerating that choice with practiced grace. So I spoke. That money was for Nora's education. I said. My voice was even. I'd spent 2 years as a pediatric therapist, learning how to be steady when the room is not. It was put in trust by her great-grandmother, before she was born. She never met Nora. She put away $240,000 so that Nora would have options in her life that she might not have otherwise. That was the only thing she asked. That the money go to Marcus's children. Patricia started to say something. I kept going. You took that from Nora? I said. You took it for a kitchen renovation and 2 vacations. You took it in increments small enough that nobody would notice. And you described it as something it wasn't. And when I asked you last spring how you'd managed to afford the renovation, you told me you'd been saving for years. I paused. You'd been saving Nora's money for years. The room was very still. Patricia's lawyer put his hand on the table between us. Not touching anything. Just marking presence. I think we should discuss. We are discussing, Marcus said. The restitution agreement took 3 weeks to finalize. There was resistance. There were calls from Ryan that went to voicemail. There were messages from Patricia that cycled through grief and anger and bargaining in approximately 48-hour intervals. Each one landing in Marcus's inbox with the weight of a woman who had never previously been held to account for anything. She couldn't repay it all at once. The attorney worked out a structured repayment, secured against the property, with an independent trustee installed to manage the account going forward. Patricia's access was revoked completely. The documentation was filed with the court. The pattern was on record. Marcus's brother Ryan called the day the agreement was signed. He'd found out from their aunt, who had found out from Patricia. His voice on the phone was the voice of someone who had been handed a version of events from one direction and hadn't yet decided whether to look at any other direction. She's devastated, he said. You understand, she's devastated. Marcus was quiet for a moment. How's Nora? He asked. Ryan stopped. What? How's Nora? Marcus said again. She's 3. She doesn't understand yet that her great-grandmother set aside money for her college, and it's gone. But she will understand someday. I want to know if you're asking about her. Ryan didn't answer. He ended the call. Christmas that year was quiet. We went to Marcus's Aunt Carol's house, which felt like neutral ground. And Nora wore a red dress with white buttons that she chose herself and insisted on wearing with rain boots, which we allowed. Because she is 3 and 3-year-olds are correct about most things. Patricia did not come. She sent a card addressed only to Nora, which Marcus opened, read, and set on the counter without comment. I spent the morning watching my daughter chase Carol's dog around the backyard and thought about the woman, Marcus's grandmother. Must have been a woman who had put away $240,000 for children who weren't yet born. Just because she wanted them to be okay? Just because she believed that giving a child options is one of the most honest things you can do for them. Nora found a stick in the yard and decided it was a magic wand and spent 20 minutes turning various lawn furniture into other things. She narrated the whole process to herself in a running monologue that made several of the adults quietly leave what they were doing just to stand near the window and listen. I thought she is going to be fine. Not because of the money, though the money matters. Because she has a father who traces a problem to its source and doesn't stop until it's fixed. Because she has a mother who has spent years learning that patience is not the same as acceptance. Because she is already at 3. A person who can make something out of nothing with a stick and a lawn chair and pure conviction. There is something that happens when you spend years accommodating a dynamic that isn't fair. You tell yourself you're keeping the peace. You tell yourself you're being the bigger person. You tell yourself that the cost of asking for what you're owed is higher than the cost of not asking, and then one day you see a number on a bank statement, and you realize the cost of not asking has been compounding quietly for 4 years. And it was never going to stop on its own. And the only thing that was protecting it was your silence. Marcus had not kept quiet because he was weak. He'd kept quiet because he trusted. That's different. Trust isn't a failure. It's a reasonable thing to extend to someone who has not yet shown you why you shouldn't, but once you see it once the number is on the table and the text messages are in the archive and the attorney has used words like misappropriation and breach of fiduciary duty in a sentence about your mother, you don't get to unsee it. And what you do next is the only thing that's actually in your control. We did not post anything online. We did not share the story at the holiday party. We did not call Ryan and try to make him understand. Some things don't need an audience. Some things just need to be corrected, documented, and closed. I still think about what Patricia said in that text to her sister-in-law. She's always been the nosy type. As if noticing things is a character flaw. As if paying attention to your own life is an imposition on the people who'd prefer you didn't. I am, it turns out, the nosy type. I notice when something doesn't add up. I notice when the warmth in someone's voice is performing something that their actions aren't supporting. I notice when the person managing your child's future is buying imported range hoods with the kind of ease that should raise a question you keep deciding not to ask. I'm going to keep noticing. I'm going to keep asking. And if that makes me difficult to manage, I think I can live with that. Nora came inside from the yard that Christmas morning, cheeks red from the cold. Rain boots, leaving small, muddy prints on Carol's kitchen floor. She held up the stick like she'd won something. I turned the chair into a horse. She announced, I told her. It works now, she said confidently, and set the stick down on the counter next to Patricia's unopened card, and went to find more dog. Marcus appeared in the doorway behind me. He looked at the stick, then at me. You okay? He asked. I thought about it for a real moment. The way I've learned to do instead of just answering automatically. Yeah, I said. I think I actually am. He put his hand on my shoulder, brief and steady. The way he does everything, outside. Nora had found the dog again and was explaining to it in great detail why rain boots are the superior footwear choice in all conditions. The dog appeared to be listening. I stood in that kitchen that smelled like someone else's family and felt, maybe for the first time in 4 years, like I was standing on ground that actually belonged to me. Not because anything was perfect, not because the account was restored or the relationship repaired or the story was over in any clean way, but because we had looked at something true and we had not looked away from it, and we had done something about it. And my daughter was in the next room, announcing herself to a dog with full confidence that the dog cared. That was enough. That was, in fact, exactly enough